Welcome to the March meeting of the Mamaroneck Historical Society. Through no pun intended, I'm Donald March. I'm president of the Mamaroneck Historical Society.
Pun.
Before I begin this evening, I would like to welcome all of the new members and the new friends that we've acquired since our last meeting and since I've last had a chance to chair one of these sessions. And before I forget, due to some personal illnesses, I wanted to thank formally, and before it slips my mind entirely, to thank Bing Millar, my vice president, for standing in for me for the last several months. And for Bing, I really do appreciate it. Several months ago, the Historical Society began a different kind of approach to trying to do something about Richbell Cemetery. The former town historian, Bert Megan, has always wanted a parking area set aside so that guests could visit the Richbell Cemetery and learn about the history and walk through the cemetery and read the plaque that was placed there by the Mamaroneck Historical Society so many years ago. The community took issue with us on providing parking there, and in that we discovered that Orienta Point really deserved its own program. If you've ever been a child and worried about buried treasure, if you've ever dreamed of pirates, if you've studied the 20s and thought about rum running, that's all Orienta Point. Certainly the name Arnold Constable rings a bell. And the founder of the town, as I said in the beginning, is buried there. It's a chance for you to experience this evening with us the rich, rich history that's at Orienta Point. Local history is an up-and-coming thing. Most people don't realize that they have a trove of history in their attics, in their basements, in their photo albums. You and I, each one of us, has our own history. And that's exactly what Mamaroneck Historical Society tries to do. It tries to preserve the very best of Mamaroneck. Whether it be building, whether it be family, whether it be the past, whether it be the present. We're saving Mamaroneck for tomorrow's youth. Join me tonight as I present Gloria Posher-Pritz, the local village and town historian, who will be presenting tonight's program. Gloria?
Thank you, Don. That was very nice. Welcome here to Mamaroneck Historical Society to our program on Orienta Point. What is Orienta Point? Where is it? What historical significance is it here in Mamaroneck? Very, very much. Orienta Point is an area of the village and town of Mamaroneck, south of the Boston Post Road, with the Mamaroneck Harbor on the east, Larchmont Harbor on the west, and Long Island Sound on the south. Now, perhaps it's northeast, southwest, but let's make it northeast, south, and west, just so that we have some kind of a boundary. That is Orienta Point. When John Richbell purchased Mamaroneck from the Indians in 1661 for a couple of pieces of clothing, some tools, a couple of guns, a couple of strings of wampum, he chose to live in Orienta. Now, why did he choose to live in Orienta? He had 3 necks of land. The eastern boundary was the Mamaroneck River, and the western boundary was Pell's land, which is New Rochelle, and 20 miles on into the county. Now, of course, he never did get that 20 miles settled because of some legal technicalities, most of them in determining where the New York colony borderline was. That it was in, I will get the date. In 1664, the boundary line between New York colony and Connecticut was the Mamaroneck River. So that when John Richbell started to contest his deed, his purchase from the Indians, they said, no, you're in New York colony, you're not in Connecticut colony. So they would not give him his true portion that the deed claimed 20 miles inland. Of course, wasn't, the Indians didn't know what deed meant. They just meant you can take it over, you know. But the boundary line was changed in 1683 to the Byram River, from Mamaroneck River to Byram River, and then it was finally agreed on that particular line in 1700. But we still have Mamaroneck's purchase. John Richbell purchased Mamaroneck and 3 necks of land. And on the deed, and this is a transcription of the deed, which is in Albany, in the State Museum, and it particularly mentions the 3 necks of land. The easternmost is called Mamaroneck Neck. So you are there. You are the only particular place mentioned in the deed itself. When Richbell died, and his widow, Anne Richbell, of course, inherited his land, and in 1698 she sold it to Caleb Heathcote, who was a young Englishman, came here to the colonies to make his fortune, but he turned out to be an absolute fabulous gift to the New York colonies. He turned out that he was mayor of New York City. He started Trinity Church downtown New York City. And of course he had his manor house here on Heathcote Hill. At that time, Anne Richbell and her daughter and son-in-law continued to live on the land that they owned, that they kept as their own and did not sell to Caleb Heathcote. In a 1774 map, Caleb Heathcote's map showing the land that he owned. Now I have taken from our local map that you see around, I have taken Orienta. And with that, I enlarged the copy of the 1774 Caleb Heathcote map to just kind of match it up. And you can see I have outlined it in red so that the boundary lines are just about the same. There's, you know, slight little variations. If I were to tip it a little, they come into agreement in one place. And this orange spot down here, which is the border of, say, Rushmore Avenue and the West Basin, Orienta Avenue to perhaps Forest Avenue, was the land that Anne Richbell kept. Therefore, we know that that is where John Richbell had his home. In doing all my reading, when I started out, how in the world could I find out about where was the spot that John Richbell had his house? And sure enough, in doing different readings and looking at maps and analyzing, this is what I come up with that until I'm proven wrong, I'm ready to say that's it. It is that 30 acres. So you're going from the West Basin to Orienta to Forest Avenue to the very beginning of the Westchester Path, which is the Boston Post Road. Now the original Westchester Path, which was an Indian path to start with, was Old Post Road. That Old Post Road was the original Indian path, became the Westchester Path. Post riders were the first one to go down there on their way towards Boston. They started in, I have it here somewhere. I don't. They started in the late 1600s. It was about 1672. And the carriages, the post carriages, did not start for 100 years later. About 1800, around that time, the post road was straightened. So therefore, we now have the straight Boston Post Road, and we have Old Post Road still the exact same place when it was an Indian path, and later then the Westchester path. When Caleb Heathcote died, left his land to his widow, when the widow died, their two surviving children inherited the land. One was married to a Dr. Johnston, who was located in New Jersey. The other one was married to Delancey, to Peter Delancey. And that's how come we have Orienta being called Delancey's Neck, because he owned the property, whether his children lived there or whether his brothers or sisters lived there, but it became known as Delancey's Neck. It wasn't known to be Orienta's Neck until really recent. So we do have Delancey's Cove off the Larchmont shore. We have Delancey's Point, which of course we call very many other different things in addition to Delancey's Neck. And Rushmore Avenue was Delancey Avenue. That has been changed. That street name has been changed, in addition to very many other different names. But let us just go back to when the Delanceys took over. Delancey's Neck became early in the 18th century and remained continuously in the Delancey family without any of it being sold until 1848, when large divisions were sold to various parties. So you realize that, you wonder now who owned this land, who owned that land. There were bits and pieces of the neck that were owned by different people. For one thing, there was a farm owned by a Sutton, who was out about where Beach Point Club is now. I've got an interesting story to tell about that. But Edward Delancey wrote quite a history of Mamaroneck in 1886. And I'd just like to read a little bit of it just so that it describes what the Orienta was in 1886. The central portion is dotted with handsome residences of gentlemen, and on the high ground at the picturesque entrance to the neck is a large and handsome hotel in the midst of large grounds, handsomely laid out through the good taste and enterprise of Mr. Thomas L. Rushmore, the gentleman who built it, and who dwells in the neighborhood with his children around him, each with his or her family possessing handsome places of their own. Then he goes on to talk about Long Beach Point. And of course, Long Beach Point is Satan's Toe, it's Flagler Drive, it's Edgewater Point. That is originally, you will see it on the 1774 map as Long Beach Point, but that's the area that he's now talking about. Upon Long Beach Point stands the splendid home of Mr. Henry Flagler. The late Mr. John Greason bought it of Mr. Thomas Delancey. So that means that the Long Beach Point belonged to Thomas Delancey, then it belonged to John Greason, and it's surprising that then you have the middle little pointer there called Grecian Point, not the end one. I really don't know why. John Greason bought it of Mr. Thomas Delancey and built a large double brick house, now a part of Mr. Flagler's magnificent mansion. The neck itself is the Satan's Toe of Fenimore Cooper's novel of that same name. You all know Fenimore Cooper lived in town, married here in Mamaroneck. Mr. Grecian gave the name of Orienta. After his house was built, he found that in the summer mornings he could lie in bed and see the sun rise directly out of the water far up the sound, and therefore he called it Orient. But then he found out that there was a little hamlet out in the Oyster Bay that was named Orient, so he tacked on the A and named it Orienta. He was unhappy when people in town started to call all of Orienta Point Orienta, and also saloons in town would say Orienta, and he was a little disappointed that the name that he chose so much, Orient, because it gave him such a feeling waking up in the morning. And then we have an Edward Delancey's estate, which was called Vergamere, okay, was located at the east end of the neck, which would have been where we have Beach Point Club today. And he writes that it is surrounded by old forest trees, and his home and Mr. Flagler's are the only places which have a double waterfront and where vessels can lie in safely in all winds. He, Mr. Delancey goes on to write in his history about in 1775, you know, this area was quite Tory. We did have some people who were all for independence, but majority of the people were Tories. And they heard that Gage's army in Boston was having short provisions. So what they did, this Mr. Sutton, who owned the farm out there by Beach Point, made a day, a killing day, where beef was driven out to the point, okay? A killing bee was held at William Sutton's house when neighboring farmers drove cattle there and on a certain day killed, dressed, salted, and barreled the beeves and packed them into this sloop to go off to feed Gage's army in Boston. Well, through carelessness, in running out with a smart breeze, the sloop ran a little too near the end of a reef in rounding Scotch caps. I mean, how far did they go? Struck a pointed rock and sank. The crew was saved, but of course the beef, you know, the fish enjoyed it that day. I have another little story to tell about the Orienta Hose Company, number 2. There was a group of volunteer firemen in Orienta, and they had to have been after Mamaroneck, because Mamaroneck was number 1, and so therefore it had to have been in the spring of 1891 that the Orienta Hose Company number 2 came into being. And the only thing is they lasted only about a year and a half because they disbanded in late 1892. Whether it was the foreman died or whatever, they just stopped. Or maybe the fire companies we had were doing such a good job that they weren't needed. But in the Hook and Ladder 100th Anniversary Bulletin, they talk about the Orienta Hose Company, and they said that they distinguished themselves when there was a large fire in Scarsdale. And the Orienta Hose Company firemen dragged the cart the 4 miles to the fire. Of course, by the time they got there, the 4 large barns had burned, but they did help in saving the house with a bucket brigade. Can you imagine dragging up to Scarsdale a hose cart behind you, wondering if you're going downhill that it's going to come on top of you? Another special story about Orienta, the estates in Orienta. In 1884, the residents of Orienta found they needed a supply of fresh water, that they really didn't have that much fresh water. And so with that, they did start a water company with a capital of $25,000. They applied for approval to go ahead with this, and of course were granted it. And they bought the site of Colonel Heathcote's mill, which of course is about where the Mamaroneck Reservoir, Westchester Joint Waterworks house is. And they bought the old mill, and they built a dam so that they would have some water there. I would assume that's what helps make our reservoir now. Am I correct, Mr. Straub? No?
It's much further down near the building that was put up in 1903.
All right.
And there's brush filled and stones and brush. You can still see the remains of it there.
You can still see the remains of that old dam that they made in 1884. Well, they did make a dam to store the water, and then they piped the water up to a reservoir, a holding reservoir, which is Gedney Pond. And Gedney Pond is behind the Church of St. Vito off Old White Plains Road and Rock Ridge Road. And from Gedney Pond, they laid 6-inch steel pipes down Mamaroneck Avenue. About where 100 Mamaroneck Avenue is, there was no building there, so they went underneath there, across the Post Road, across the West Basin, which of course at the time was just mud flats, and on into Orienta, and the estates then had their supply of fresh water. Even though that particular hookup, that water hookup, lasted only about 10 or 15 years until much better arrangements were made. In doing research to find out what's so special about Orienta, I was able to locate maps in our history research room here in the library, the Historical Society History Research Room. And I have made slides. I've copied a number of things so that hopefully you can see it, and if not, then you're going to share it with you later. This is an 1867 Beers map, and we do have Orienta down here just a little, and I copied it on the slide, so it will be a little larger. And then we have an 1880 map, which shows very much of Orienta, quite large, and it does tell you the different dates and their names. They all had names. We knew that the Delancey home there at Beach Point section was called Vergamere. Well, Bostwick in 1880 had it and continued with the name Vergamere. It most likely was the same house, and of course later became Merrill School. All right. We do have one called Chitola, and of course then Waits Court, and on Orienta Avenue you see the entrance to Waits Court, which of course is the Westchester Jewish Center, and the constables here, and you have Siegels, who then purchased it, Nathan Strauss purchased it, but we will share that with you in the slides. And I'm just showing you what was available to me to do research. Yes, dear.
Instead of the Westchester Jewish Center, it's the Westchester Day School.
Day School, excuse me. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ingesser. Yes, it is the Westchester Day School. The next map that I was able to look at was one made up in 1892 for Thomas Rushmore. Now, Thomas Rushmore, when we read in the Delancey history, had this hotel at the beginning of Orienta Point there that looked so beautiful, and he had his children living around him. Well, apparently he owned very much land there. He also was a well-known citizen, very interested in the community. He was town supervisor for 2 terms. He was the very first mayor of the village of Mamaroneck in 1895. And this map is one that was drawn up of his holdings. And as you can see, it is absolutely so frail. And it is on 2 sides. Apparently, these drawings of the churches and the train stations have to be original woodcuts. They're absolutely gorgeous. And of course, it is a 2-sided map. It shows all of Orienta on the one side, and then just the section from Bleecker to well, it says Meadow, but of course that name was changed, showing who lived there with their names, who owned it. I have copied this map because it is absolutely too frail to use to scan. And I copied it to scale so that we can look at it later. I have in red, I have placed the names of the correct streets as they are today, and also colored in with red pencil the houses that were there, so that at a glance you can see this is 1892. Very, very few people lived there.
Gloria, where was the hotel?
The hotel had to have been in his holdings, which had to have been around, Claflin, Rushmore, Orienta, around that area.
So Gloria, in what earlier you said that it was on a hill. Yeah,
On a hill.
and it probably is a hill that's right across
Okay.
Gillis Park.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised that's exactly where it is. I lived there on Old Post Road in the 40s, in the 30s and 40s. And when I lived there, that sloping hill coming down from most likely where the hotel was, down into the point of Rushmore and Orienta, had sheep grazing.
Goats, well, goats too, wasn't it?
Goats?
Goats.
Goats? I remember seeing sheep, but that, you know, my eyes don't see too well. Even then they didn't. And of course the reason for it, you know, why would they have sheep? We don't have farms here, I mean, you know. And it was that they kept the grass cut. They kept it tended. But of course it was absolutely gorgeous to go out in the morning, whether you're going to school or going to work, and there's the sheep just, you know, so grazing there. No cows, no. The next map I was able to use was this big, huge atlas, 1919, and of course there's two pages that are Orienta, one the western side and one the eastern side, and I copied this too. You should know the trouble I went through to copy this was incredible, but you will see the results of it. I also have a booklet of the Merrill School, 1921-22 Merrill School, which was a gift from Bernardo Fraioli when I had the oral history with him. And what it does is explain, it's called Oaksmere, okay? But it is the Merrill School. And every other page are pictures that it shows you. The buildings, the tennis courts, the ice skating rinks, the students doing their activities. Bernardo Fraioli, in talking to him, said he was the one who milked the cows so that there would be fresh milk and butter for the students. It was quite a large school. They took in the entire area from the Sound, you're talking about the right angle of the Sound and the coming into the harbor, to Bleecker, all the way past Orienta Beach Club, because the Marshall home was one of their dormitories. I also spoke to Bill Atchison, who I believe is the oldest, he tells me he's the oldest continuous resident in Orienta Point. He's 81. He was born on Orienta Point and has lived there all his life. He shares some pictures with me and some stories. Truly very special that I was able to speak to him. I now would like to, before we go on to the slides, why don't we just talk about Grace Huntley Pugh's watercolor paintings. You know, well, Gracie does gorgeous stuff. This is from Shore Acres, looking at the boatyards at Orienta. Isn't that gorgeous? This one here is also looking from, am I correct, Gracie? Looking from Orienta, and you can see the Orienta apartments there. No, it's looking from Harbor Island across, up and out to the Sound. Isn't that beautiful? This one which is black and white, right, Gracie? Is of the West Basin.
That's at the West Basin, and that's Orienta in the distance on the right. And the story, yes, and the story of that picture is that
Why don't you come up and tell us the story of that picture?
well, it's a little off the subject.
Well, that's all right. Let's just hear the story, because it's such a gorgeous picture, Gracie.
Well, this is in honor of, I'll tell it in honor of Bob Arbib, whom I'm sure you all knew. Bob got the idea of having the cherry trees, and this was back in 1971, and he asked me to make a little stick figure drawing. I said, I don't know how to make a stick figure drawing, but I'll make a drawing of what I think it ought to look like. So I spent a week doing the research of all different kind of cherry trees, and it was March in a snowstorm. And I went down, sat in the snow, and I drew the sketch, the basic sketch. Then I drew in my trees, and then I dreamed of the summer and put in our boat going down here. And then I watched the children come along, and the dogs and the so forth, so they got in, and then the birds got in, and so there we were. And I gave it to Bob about 10 days later, and of course it wasn't stick figures. And Ina Myers put it in the paper with a nice picture on the front, and the picture itself, and a good headline. And so instead of 100 trees, as Bob visualized, we had 350 trees. And they just kept coming till they had to stop. Well, so then I was away. I had to go away for 6 weeks, and he in the meantime ordered the cherry trees, and I came back and they were all planted, but they were not planted with little vistas through them. I designed them carefully, vista, vista, so you see the scene instead of trees. Where's the harbor? So that's the way it is. So this is a debatable plan right now. The trees are getting bigger. In a while you'll see the vistas, but not yet. So in the meantime, you can look through and see Orienta out beyond. Okay?
Thank you, Grace. The money for the cherry blossoms came in so fast. Well, that's because everyone wanted to participate. Yes. Do we have any questions before we go into seeing the slides?
Let me take that away from you.
Thank you.
I would like to add one other thing, too. When they put the rock down there at Harbor Island, I'm not on that rock. I only gave a picture worth a number of hundreds of dollars, but because, and everybody said, oh, you're included, but because they didn't have their $35, I'm not on the rock.
What we can do is turn out the lights and turn on the slide projector, and we will go ahead. Is it all the way up to the top? Fine. Okay. Fine. No, can it go higher? I doubt it. Put this up in front, just in front. Oh yeah, that'll do it. She'll do that. Fine. Sunday, I drove through Orienta taking pictures of how it looked that day, just this past Sunday. In driving through, it was just beautiful, a gorgeous place. And this, of course, is the scene looking out from Sea Haven Drive, looking east. looking west. And this is looking east. You can see that this little island here is full of seagulls. It was low tide, so you don't see the water up high, but it is just gorgeous. Just an idea of what a special place we have. This is one of my favorite postcards. It is of Mamaroneck Harbor. And of course, the postcard dates back. To perhaps the turn of the century, to 1900. But you do see Orienta Point there on the right, without houses, with plenty of trees. I feel that this here is the grassy knoll that used to be in the middle of the harbor.
That's Black Tom.
That's Black Tom? Whatever, it just gives you an idea of what Orienta was before it was built up. This is another picture of Orienta here on the right, okay? And this is from perhaps Cortlandt Avenue, from Heathcote Hill. This here would be the Landmarks Inn, where the gas station is, on the corner of Fenimore Road. And again, you're looking through and you see the wooded area. And it has to be, again, at low tide, because you see not the water covered. As a child, when it was high tide, the West Basin was truly covered with water. At low tide, it was just mud flats. An aerial photo of the harbor, and of course here on the left side is Orienta. That's the way this is the correct way. West Basin, here up there on the top. Harbor Island Beach here with the white strip. So you see what a gorgeous harbor we have. That picture was probably taken about 1950, 1960. The West Basin, before the wall was made, this was a postcard also. And the postcards collection that I have were all taken anywhere from 1900 to 1920. And look at that gorgeous house there. That has to be along Rushmore Avenue. And this is one of my pictures Sunday, just to tell you that that's how it looks from Harbor Island, with our apartments and all of our boat yards and the octagonal house. This is a transcribed note by James Mott. This is, oh, I'm going the wrong way. Okay. This is the actual writing. Okay? We're going to now go back and see what it says. I, James Mott. Now, James Mott was the son-in-law of John Richbell. Okay? I, James Mott, do give and grant to Margaret Disbrow and her 3 sons, Henry, John, and Benjamin, all belonging to Mamaroneck, to them and their families forever, the liberty of burying their dead, where the father, mother, and in a certain piece of land laying near the salt meadow, where Mr. John Richbell and his wife's mother, Marjorie Parson, and my wife, Mary Mott, which would have been John Richbell's child, was buried in my home lot or field adjoining to my house. That as absolute proof that John Richbell is buried there, right there in the Richbell Cemetery where the monument is located. That is the only place on Orienta that we ever saw of any kind of gravestones. So it has to be that place. And this now is the cemetery, just taken from the yard, again from Sunday. The Historical Society hopes to have the cemetery extended, with the brush removed towards the back there on the right-hand side, where you do see stones. And we do wish to put a split rail fence around it to designate where exactly it is, rather than having these pillars down here to traffic, whatever it is. Where is that? It is on Rushmore Avenue. You go into Rushmore Avenue from Orienta, and you go to the very end of the park, and that's where it is. In back of the first house. In back of the first house.
And there's a chain across, so you can't get back.
This is the monument that's there, dedicated to Rich Bell. That was put there in 1961 at the 300th anniversary of Mamaroneck. You realize that we are past 325 years of being a community. We always were named Mamaroneck. We never had any other name. Visiting out in Wyoming a couple of years back, oh, a big deal. They were going to have their 100th anniversary. I said, oh my goodness, we're in our 4th century. Oh, I mean, well, what was 100 years? It was nothing, okay? This is another little note from Ann Richbell that is giving a particular point. Whereas John Richbell, having disposed of the Salt Meadow formerly belonging to Black, I have ordered that the lot of meadow containing 2 acres, 1 rod, 32 something or others, be sold to her son, John Emerson. I don't know, she says son John Emerson. I don't know where the son comes in with John Emerson. But that is, as it was written by the witness here, which was William Coles. These are all in the town of Mamaroneck vault. There's a book where the minutes of the town of Mamaroneck have been transcribed, which is full of information. Very first map that I have come across that showed Mamaroneck was a map, an Indian map, dated 1690. And this here says Mamaroneck, okay? And of course, we are basically from the Mohicans country. Of course, they don't know how to spell, even though the Wapaquiwam was of the Siwanoy tribe. But that's 1690. This here would have been the Connecticut River, so. This next map shows how Mamaroneck was and the purchase of it. And of course you do see Orienta, you do see the county road from New Rochelle, and of course it dips here because that's the Old Post Road. Here would be Heathcote Hill. That would be the manor house. So this is a map that would date back to Caleb Heathcote, because that's where his manor house was. Remember, Rich Bell lived here. And this is Caleb Heathcote, very honorable Caleb Heathcote. He died at 56 of a stroke, but he was one who believed in education, who believed in religion, who was a kind gentleman, and did very much to put things to right in Mamaroneck. Caleb Heathcote, in doing all his purchases, shortly after he made the purchase in 1698, in 1701, 1702, he applied for a grant, a manor grant, to call his land the Manor of Scarsdale. And here you have it, that this then is the Manor of Scarsdale. And of course this then would be Mamaroneck Harbor, and this here would be Orienta, part of the Manor of Scarsdale. He was from Scarsdale in England, and Scarsdale also means a place with many rocks. And of course we do have many rocks.
Excuse me, what is the, do you have any idea what the name of the property between the one name, one unnamed there between Huguenot and...
Right here?
Huguenots and Scars Don't Matter. What's that piece there? You know?
No, I don't. Dick Lederer, do you know?
That was Palmer's property, I guess.
Palmer?
Palmer? I don't know. Dick, do you know?
Palmer.
Yeah, I believe that's what
The one in here?
debt, foreclosure was debt.
Oh, I see.
But that map of the manor is not correct.
That's not what?
I gave a long talk.
Yeah. But this is really to give people the idea of where it was located.
It did not include Mamaroneck, only a little bit of it.
Well,
All of Orienta Point except for 30 acres that you spoke of before.
yeah.
A little strip beside the Mamaroneck River.
Yes, that we know.
Where the Getty Cemetery is now.
Yes.
And all the rest of Mamaroneck was not part of the manor.
Scarsdale Mountain, you mean?
It was a town of Mamaroneck before it was, before the manor was created.
Where those 6 lots were,
Okay. All right, we'll have to talk about that, Dick.
The
Okay?
town was created in 1693.
As far as I know, it was after that.
This is Edward Delancey. This is the gentleman who wrote the history in 1886 and explained all the how the land looked and how John Greason named it Orienta and about Rushmore's Hotel. A beautiful history. This is the 1867 Beers map that I have just copied, just a little bit from the large map of what is, it now is saying Delancey and Orienta. Okay? We have here the names of Seney, Haddon, Craighead, Halstead. Craighead, by the way, was the person who built the causeway from the mainland down to Hog Island, to Harbor Island, the original causeway. Here they're naming this Delancey Point. Here's Long Beach Point. And all of these little things must indicate that it was the low-lying land. This is the map from the 1919 atlas that I got that shows you the outline of where you're going to find this section of Orienta and where you're going to find that section in page number 33. And I included it only because it's colorful and it shows you the outlines of the different areas. This is a 1936 photo of Old Post Road. The person taking the picture stood on the corner where Royal Place and Old Post Road are. And you're looking up the road, and this is Mrs. Sullivan's house. Mrs. Sullivan's husband was the one who, according to Mr. Atchison, her husband was the trainer for Nathan Strauss's trotters. Nathan Strauss had trotters, and Tim Sullivan, Mrs. Sullivan's husband, was the trainer, and they would go off to Goshen, and Mrs. Sullivan raised canaries. I knew Mrs. Sullivan because I lived in the house right here on the corner of Old Post Road. That's how it was in 1936, a country road. Across the street was nothing but woods where you would hear the pheasants screaming. Mary LaJudith tells me she sees deer a couple of times. And this, of course, is the same section today, this past Sunday, and this would be Mrs. Sullivan's house. And this is the Old Post Road looking down the other way towards the Sound. Okay? This here would be Royal Place right here on the corner. Gillies Park would be down here. The Sound would be there. And again, it is, of course, it is in the summertime with plenty of trees. The trees are full. And last Sunday, this is how it looked in the wintertime with the bare trees. But you could see so many houses. By the way, I was 14 years old And I remember going to see my friends. This is the kind of a place we lived in the late 30s, early 40s. I was 14 years old, and I had friends down in Washingtonville. They were having a party or something, and I went to the party and walked home alone. Now, it particularly stands in my mind because as I'm walking past the cemetery on Mount Pleasant Avenue, the Old Town Cemetery, St. Thomas's bell rang midnight. And I'm saying to myself, chuckling, I was not afraid, that here I am passing a cemetery at midnight. But I was walking home alone to Old Post Road. We have changed. I don't know whether I would walk that now with someone with me. We had experiences here in Mamaroneck during the Revolution. For one thing, in August 1776, the very first bloodshed took place in Mamaroneck when there was some kind of a difference between recruiting for the Queen's Rangers and someone who was unhappy about it, and there was the first bloodshed. But later on in October, in fact October 21, Colonel Robert Rogers of the Queen's Rangers came to Mamaroneck with his troops and went to the schoolhouse and told the children, go home, and he took over the schoolhouse as his headquarters. Now, the schoolhouse is listed as north of the turnpike, which of course at that time would have been Old Post Road. We don't know whether it was here in this section. This is of course Orienta and Rushmore with, excuse me, this is Old Post Road coming down with Orienta and the West Basin. Was it in this section? We don't quite know where it was. Was it across the street? Now this is Orienta and the Post Road. Was the schoolhouse here in the park? We don't exactly know where it was, but the schoolhouse was there for at least 40 years. And sure enough, after Colonel Rogers went in and told the children to go home, that his headquarters were there, well, that night there was a skirmish on Heathcote Hill. And the gentleman in charge of all of that was Colonel Robert Rogers. Now, this is out of whole cloth, how he looks or how he dressed. In his book that someone wrote about him, biography, they included a painting of what he looked like. It turned out that by the time the Revolution was, he was an older gentleman, had already been to debtor's prison in London, but he had done marvelous work in the French and Indian War, winning very many battles for the British. Across from the schoolhouse was the house of Henry Disbrow that was erected in 1677. And this is land that was sold to Disbrow by John Richbell, and he built his house. Now that is a sketch of it, some drawing. This is an actual photograph, probably taken the late 1800s, perhaps the early 1900s. It, of course, is no longer there, but what did remain standing after the house burned was the chimney, that there was a big, huge, vast chimney with spaces inside here to hold it, and that's how James Fenimore Cooper in writing used that particular chimney. And of course, that chimney was on the property where you see the Washington Arms, probably built closer to what we now know as the Boston Post Road, rather than back here where Washington Arms is. But in, again, my postcard show, I asked, I had a picture of the chimney and said that there's a story that said that The stones from the chimney, the original chimney, were used to rebuild it. And I said, oh, what a delightful story. Wouldn't it be wonderful it's so? Well, sure enough, Bernard Farioli did call me and say he built the chimney now for Washington Arms. He did build that chimney, and they did use the old stones from the Disbrow house. So it was just wonderful to know that that is so. Now, why is it called Washington Arms? Washington did not sleep here. He didn't even have lunch there in the Disbrow house. But what we do have is the Washington rock. And these two bushes have overgrown, and the rock has weathered, and the ivy has covered it. This is a close-up view of it. I remember as a child that you could definitely, positively see the outline of Washington's face. Now, this is from a postcard. I don't ever remember, of course, the postcard was taken a good 30, 40 years before I remember seeing it, but I have a feeling that the postcard just, you know, they went over to show these marks, just to make it much more of an outline. Yes?
As I recollect, it was a side face. It was a focal.
That's right. It was, well, I don't ever remember the other eye. Don't ever remember the other eye. Yes, yes. Oh, yeah. You did see the eye and the strong nose and a slight little bit of the mouth. And, of course, that phenomenon occurred when they were blasting for the sewer in the early 1900s. And one of the men doing the work said, oh, my, look at that. That looks just like Washington's face. And that's how come then it was left there and made to be something important. Just across the street from the back end of Washington Arms, Hall Street and Orienta Avenue. I've been told that here at this corner where the house stands, and the house, of course, is recent. It was all just wooded place, but I'm told that the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts in the teens, the 19-teens, did camp out there, that this is where they came with their tents and their little cookout fires to spend a sleepover night and enjoy themselves in the country. In the country rather than, say, down in the village. This is difficult to see, but I'm showing you here that this is Rushmore and Orienta, and of course I wanted to just remind you about the sheep that used to, and goats that used to graze there not too long ago. In the 19 map, I have taken pictures of it, and I'd like to just go through fast, just so that you get an idea. The yellow things are, of course, the houses. Now it's 1919, okay? And we're just going to go through just so that you get an idea of how sparse it was. I mean, there's no houses here at all, just about none. I mean, when we go down Orienta now, we see so many houses. Do you find where you are? Of course, this house that was in Carpenter's is 711 Bleecker, and that is supposed to have been designed by Stamford White. Also, Lillian and Dorothy Gish lived in it when it was time for D.W. Griffith. And Indian Creek went all the way up into Rushmore Avenue. Of course, it doesn't now. We did have Dr. Carpenter's Sanitarium. It's no longer. And there we are with Flagler Drive, and you could see the very few buildings that were on there at the time. A postcard from the early 1900s of Flagler Drive, the outer edge. Doesn't that look beautiful? Look at those stately trees. And this was Flagler's mansion. Again, it was a postcard. Small place. And of course, in 1919, you know that Flagler was instrumental with, of course, building up Florida, with building Standard Oil. But of course, then he died, and his land was up for sale, and D.W. Griffith purchased Flagler Drive, Edgewater Point, and made it into a movie studio. An absolute unique time in the village of Mamaroneck. The movie studio was there from 1919 until about 1925. During that time, he made, 3 or 4 movies. Only one movie was truly financially successful, and that was the very first one he made here, Way Down East, which the Historical Society showed at the Emlyn last year. It was absolutely magnificent. He hired very many people in town. It was a booming business for everyone, whether they were carpenters, plumbers, or just plain go-getters, or in the extras in the scenes. Very exciting that they had buses that would meet the trains to pick up the people coming in as extras, or the stars on the train, or if someone was going to take part in it from the community, they would meet the bus at the train station. And this is how his studio looked, an aerial photo of that part of Flagler Drive. The main house burned one very, very cold winter night, and the firemen had problems getting out there, that there was just so much snow. And once they got there, there really was no water that they could do, and so the house just burned down. When the property was sold, it was sold with the stipulation that it would never be another movie set. And so the studio was taken down board by board. And you do hear stories about people who went there and took some of the boards and built a house, or my uncle, who was a young man and went there with a truck and got the boards and put them in the backyard for his mother to burn as fuel that winter. So that was what happened to the studio. One of the things that D.W. Griffith did do there out on the point was make his own sets. Now this was quite unique, that he was one of the first to do this in movie making, was to make their own sets. Now this is in Orphans of the Storm and the guillotine scene, and he had a French village made to photograph, and of course it was just the fronts of the village. In speaking to one of the women who was just perhaps an 8-year-old, and she was an extra for this scene, looking out the window, and she said, you know, we have to climb the ladder to stand on the little board and look out the window, and of course it was, you know, just the front. In speaking to Mr. DeBono, he was one of the gophers for the studio, and one of his duties in this particular scene was to be underneath the guillotine and hold the rope so that there would be no accident with the knife falling down. Very special time. This is the 1880 map that I've gone back to, and just to show that here we have Bostwick owned the land here, which was Vergamere. Here's Marshall's, which is the Orienta Beach Clubhouse. Okay, Dr. Carpenter's sanitarium was here. And as you can see, Rushmore owned here, Rushmore owned here. I mean, he owned very many places. These are the very special prized cows that Bostwick had that was on their farm. And there was a picture here in our research room, the particular Guernsey cows from Bostwick. What it does is just show you, here we do have a beautiful wooded place.
That building is still there.
Really? Where is it?
It's used as the laundry.
The laundry for the apartments?
No, for the beach point.
Really? Oh, I must go see it. Fabulous. Wonderful. This is the Merrill School. Okay, Oaksmere it was called. And in the booklet on the Merrill School, look at the big, huge building. That had to have been the main building. And this is the front side of it.
That's not Beach Point
No,
Club.
that's Orienta Beaches.
No. It may be taken down, or maybe just parts of it. I'm going back and forth.
This is Beach Point Club.
Beach Point Club. That's what I thought it was. That's what I thought. Now, I have a feeling, I'm not positive, I haven't had time to check, but that I wouldn't be a bit surprised that this was the Vergemere that Delancey built, and then Bostwick took over, and now is Beach Point Club. It was Merrill School, and now Beach Point. Gorgeous. This is showing the Merrill School, how they have that entire corner, okay? Here's the dormitory. Here's another school, Merrill School for young ladies. They also had a branch in France, by the way. When Merrill School was disbanded, they moved 2 or 3 houses out from that particular area of Merrill School to other places. And this one is on Walton. Yes, I think it's, no, I think it's Walton. I will find my notes. 705 Walton. And according to Mr. Atchison, how you can tell that it is from the Merrill School is because it has the diamond windows. Now, Mr. Atchison's home on Rushmore is also one moved from the Merrill School. And then there is also another one that has been moved. Isn't it cute? This particular section shows you Waits Court, and McGregor's place was called Chitola. The Hegeman residence was Rosedene. The Waits Court, which of course is the Westchester Day School, of course extended all the way around. You know, it's quite odd. You see Hegeman owning property here, you see Hegeman owning property there. They seem to have bits all over. This is a postcard from when it was Waits Court from the early 1900s, and it doesn't look too much different now. And this is again a postcard of Waits Court, and what a magnificent building. Of course, it's the Westchester Day School. Westchester Day School. Yes. No. There have been some changes. This is the inside of Chitola, McGregor's estate. We have 2 pictures of the inside of Chitola, and you could see whether it's the dining room, and look how decorated it is. I mean, it sure is. This is the other section of that same room. I guess it's the late 1890s that's the way they decorated. We have reeds. We have driftwood with Henry Siegel owned driftwood. And Mr. Atchison was born at Driftwood and shared some pictures. This is a picture I took Sunday. And of course, the stone pillars are still there that say Driftwood. This says Driftwood right here. And of course, the houses are all over on Orienta, on the way to the end of Orienta there, after the right angle turn.
That's Jean Grant's, I believe.
That I don't know. There is in taking the photographs, I tried not to show houses, only because this is a public thing and I don't want to cause problems. But the house is right there on the right. It's right next. I mean, that's just their driveway. There was a car right there behind the pillars. This is a picture of Driftwood. Look at how gorgeous it is. Look at the gardening, the elaborate display. Just beautiful.
What part of Orienta is that? Is that going down?
It is.
Near Pirates Cove or?
Across the street, yeah.
Yes, across the street from Pirates Cove. It would be just past Sea Haven, going down and then making the right angle turn. Okay. Again, on the water side, on the sound side. Okay. This was their stable. One of the things I found in my discussion is that all of these estates, of course, had workers, whether they were the drivers, whether the trainers, whether they were cooks or farmers, and the owners of the estates took very good care of the people who worked for them. They were very tender, very kind to them. I know the Hegemans saw to it that their coachman had a house of his own. They built a house for him. That would have been Emmeline Powell's father, that they built a house for them. They were always very concerned about the well-being of their help. Really very precious, a very gentle time of life. This is the beach at Driftwood. I don't know if the stone wall is still there. And here we go to the very tip, of course, with the constables were here, and the constables were across the way. We had St. John's Home, a Catholic home, also goes down into here, St. John's Home. Now, this was Driftwood that we did see that was owned by Siegel at the time, but then after Siegel left it, Nathan Strauss purchased it. And of course, Nathan Strauss is from Macy's, from A&S. He was a very kind man, very interested in health services, and was instrumental in starting the Mamaroneck Health Center here on Stanley Avenue. Very interested, very kind man. As you can see, these people were interested in the community, interested in the people. Their life must have been soft and easy, and they made it that way for everyone else. This is Thomas Rushmore's residence. I'm assuming this is the one that would have been down on the point of Rushmore and Orienta, in that locality, in that 30 acres, but I'm not certain because he had so much land. This is a house on Rushmore. It's on the original 1892 map. It's on the corner of Rushmore and Fairway. I couldn't get the number. I didn't want to impose and go up onto the porch and find out. This is the house on Fairway, and on the 1892 map, it's called Ely House, E-L-Y. I love the lines. This is one on 835 Claflin. You could see all the older houses always had the stone pillars, the stone walls designating their boundary lines. Who knows? Big house. And this is the one on 711 Bleecker that Glory Landis now lives in, that is supposed to have been designed by Stamford White, and also was a residence during Griffith's movie studio time. Lillian and Dorothy Gish lived there, who were supposed to be very sweet, friendly people. This is just across the way, and also on the 1892 map, 711 Bleecker Avenue, 749 Bleecker. The name on that one said in the map, Edmund Lascaris. Here's another one, 981 Orienta Avenue, which is about across the street from the Driftwood pillars. Mrs. Joseph now? Oh, I don't know Mrs. Joseph. Oh, okay. Yes, you want to go back? Sure, hon?
Do you know the address? Is that on?
This one, yes, this is on 981 Orienta Avenue. Richard Barthelmess lived there. Oh, wonderful.
We've always heard the story that would be, that house is in back of us. Story we always heard, I guess.
You heard the story that...
D.W. Griffith's house.
No, D.W. Griffith, no. D.W. Griffith, according to the men who worked there at the studio, he lived on Flagler's Point. He had his own small place. He
heard that he used the house to house some of the
The stars. Yes. Yeah, well, as someone said, Richard Barthelmess lived there. And of course, he was one of the stars in the D.W. Griffith productions. This says the residence of Frank Dupignac. I don't know where that is.
I think you showed the other side of that house. That's right.
Really?
It was turned around and made the face Claflin.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Turn the property to switch around the private house.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, they put the front of the house on the back.
so you,
Big portico.
the 835, this is the other side of 835 Claflin. Fabulous. Oh, I've got that one solved. Fine. A postcard of the Esplanade, Orienta Point. Of course, Orienta Point was kind of on the late side and being made, and the Esplanade is the little street with the island in the middle along Orienta, round about the center of it. This is a tree on Sea Haven, and I just had to take a picture of it because it was absolutely magnificent. This section of the country is known for its big, huge trees, in particular its copper beeches. I wouldn't be a bit surprised that's what that one is. I'm not positive, though. But it's on a slight rise all by itself. It is truly something to see. I just had to take a picture. That's just about the end of my trip and my slides. We can turn on the lights. We can turn on the lights, please.
Where's that peach tree located?
Sea Haven. Sea Haven.
On the right as you go toward
Will you turn off the, oh, fine, okay, fine, thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes.
I notice on some of the maps, I forget the dates, but there are subdivisions there. Who made those subdivisions?
You see, on this Richbell map, on this Thomas L. Rushmore map in 1892, I'm not going to show you the very gentle one. I'm going to show you my copies, okay? I just wondered if the subdivisions were made at that point, because you don't see them before. The 1867 map does not show any subdivisions. It just kind of, you know, it's all over. The 1867 Pierce map. But this particular 1892 map of Thomas Rushmore, it does have all the, for one thing, it does have the separate estates already lined out. I went and going up and down the streets on Sunday and counted the houses. And sure enough, on 9 Acres Lane, I think there was something like 16 houses. And that would probably have been where, well, let's see now, where the Reed estate was, okay? Where the, further down, there's maybe 10 houses on some of the streets, whereas you had one big estate. Now you just have so many houses. 9 Acres has 16 houses, Nautilus Lane 10, Sea Haven 13, and the houses themselves, they're not close together. They have the nice plot of their own. Also, in going up and down the streets, it is absolutely beautiful. The houses all seem to be low to the ground. It just does not spoil the vista at all, that no matter where you go, you could see it. The only houses that you saw with 2 or 3 stories were the old estates, whereas the newer ones were just architecturally done beautiful. Something to be very proud. I must say that I did go then to take a picture of Orienta from Shore Acres, and I noticed in Shore Acres they were all, most of them, were the 2-story house kind of with the box, that were just not the decor, not the architecture that we have on Orienta Point. Of course, you know, I'm prejudiced, since I love it. You can see on the reverse side of the Rushmore map, it's broken down into lots. You know, so I have a feeling that perhaps for this sale, this is what was done, that it was then made into subdivisions. Anything else someone would like to know?
I just like to say about Sea Haven Drive, when they built that house in there, I've forgotten who the builder was at the time, built the houses on that, forgotten who the builder was, but he made a great miscalculation as to the cost of putting through that street, because when he started in the dig there and just took the top of it off, he found it was all brick walls. There had been extensive wine cellars there.
Really?
So he had to hold through all these...
Extensive wine cellars, brick walls.
Yes, he had to put in the sewers and the water mains and drains and so on, so he had to knock down all these walls. But
This
in
is at
addition to
Sea
that,
Haven. Yes.
it required so much fill that was a much added expense too. And then he decided to regrade the street in order so that he wouldn't have to put in so much fill. The water main was already in place, and all the connections had been made to the lots. So he came along there with a bulldozer. He sent somebody with a bulldozer, and he knocked all the connections off the water mains. So this was an additional expense too. He had to pay for all those things to be put back in again. So it was a disaster. There.
Oh, but it is beautiful
But it was
now.
due to the wine cellars.
Yes.
It was one of those
That you don't
houses you
even
were
know.
talking
You see, an
about.
extensive wine cellar at the
Yeah.
estate. Sure. Don, why don't you bring the microphone closer and turn off the thank you. Yeah, Driftwood.
No,
Yeah.
the Constable Estate, which is down
Constable?
further.
Okay.
That was that brick building with the U shape to it.
Uh-huh.
And there was a space between that building and the next one, which is an old cottage that the gardener lived in. And when the people moved into that house, the first year, their heating bill was immense because there had been a huge greenhouse next door between the stables and the gardener's cottage. And all of the heat was going through this greenhouse, which no longer existed. And we had a very balmy winter.
Oh, wonderful stories. Oh, yes.
The Constable property, Tommy Mann.
Tommy Manville lived in the stable.
I forgot which way.
Which wife? Do you remember about when it was, Martha?
It's probably in the 50s.
40s, 50s? Fine, sure. Yeah, it's hard to tell. Well,
Gloria?
yes, Gracie.
I just want to go back to the Mamaroneck River. It was the boundary of Connecticut all the way back to 1661. You said 64, but I have to speak up.
Well,
For the ride purchase, going by the ride purchase, it went right to Mamaroneck River
Okay.
in 1661.
I believe the date of 1664 dates back to when it became British.
Well, if you can make
And what it was
anything but
before,
Connecticut,
that would have been the
1661.
difference. 61, it would have been Dutch, and
No,
64.
61 is when Connecticut English came to the Mamaroneck River.
Okay,
Okay.
fine. Very good, thank you.
One
Yes.
other thing, Gloria, when you mentioned Old Plains, Old Post Road, when it went down to Mamaroneck area, then it went where the bank, the savings bank is now, in the back of that, and then crossed on Tompkins and went out to the Post Road. That was the main road at the time.
That was the main, that's
the way
what
it
the
went.
post road
That's the way it went.
crossed at Tompkins,
Right.
yes. In fact, the bridge was made quite late, that they used to then just go over the stones, yes. And Tompkins Avenue was the post road, yes. Yes,
How many hours of research did it take you to generate all this information?
I
It's
don't
it's
know.
amazing detail.
I don't know. Only thing I know is that, of course, growing up in Orienta, I just love it. As a teenager that rode a bike all the time, I mean, to ride down to the end of Orienta was just I mean, you know, maybe I did it every day. I loved it. And so it's a very special spot in my heart. By the way, when my father owned the house there on Old Post Road in Royal Place, and at some point he was given a small amount of money to change the deed. That it seems that everyone in that area had like a foot of harbor that was included in their deed. And at some point in the 40s, I think it was, they wanted to do away with that and make it straight. And so then he approved for some very small amount of money in order to relinquish that 1 foot right to the harbor.
There's a lot of lots along Harbor Island where the park is now. Very narrow lots. One of the maps does show that. But all the houses
That's
had
it.
When you bought a piece of property, you bought
You bought that
a
too,
very
yes.
narrow piece of harbor.
Oh, I
access
have
or
not
something.
seen that map, and I was wondering exactly what and how. I just recall my father talking about it. Yes, yeah. Fine. Thank you so much. Oh, we do have one more question, yes.
Who owns Hampshire Golf Course?
Yes, I was going to ask that question.
That was, I see a name, Howell. Howell. Yeah, it was always kind of very vague that I couldn't quite make it out. In fact, in this, I do see Howell, I do see Rushmore, a speck of Halsted. You see? It doesn't go into the hummocks. The hummocks itself was, here you see Howell, you see Rushmore, Halsted, but the hummocks itself, which would have been here, it doesn't go in. But in the very early map, the 1774 map, it says Barker's hummocks. So now what happened in between, you know, those 200 years, I really don't know.
Well,
Okay?
most of that golf course was salt marsh until the...
It
forest
was,
built.
very much of it, yes, yes. As you could see on the 1867 Beers map, very many little bitty weeds like are put in over there that it was very low lying. Yes.
Could you tell us something about the seminary? You mentioned it briefly. What was it?
It was wasn't a seminary. It was more of a convalescent home. Mhm. There were two of them out there. This Dr. Carpenter's and St. John's.
No, this was over where Pirates Cove is now.
Yeah, St. John.
St.
St.
John's.
John's.
St. John's. It was a seminary. See, that's
That's what
something I
we were
did not
told.
know. Okay.
As I understand it, they own the property that Gene Grant now has, that he just recently developed. And they own Pirates Cove.
On one of the maps, it did
That's
say
good.
St. John's on either side of the road, and I just assumed that it
Long
was
before that, a man by the name of Peter Myers.
Myers. Fine. Well,
The story we got
why
was that
don't we
when that...
why don't we just close our program, and then you folks can come up and look at the maps. And I thank you so much. It has been a pleasure. It was a lot of
Gloria, while you were doing the program, Joe Windish gave me an official signal that Holwell Bank the exclusive territorial rights to sell real estate in Orienta if you want the job.
Why not?
It is a wonderful piece of real estate and a true gem for Mamaroneck. I'd like to tell you that it also is a chance for us to realize how many buildings are still with us and how many have been taken away by time and other circumstance. History is all around you. While it's here, reach out, touch it, save it. What I'd like to say to you now is I'd like to say the natural development of this type of a program, which was born out of the Richbell Cemetery upgrade or rededication that we have planned, is to invite you all to do some exercise next month. On April the 28th, hopefully the weather will be sunny, I'd like to invite you all to visit any of our historical cemeteries. They'll be staffed by members of the Historical Society, And put the LMC-TV camera crews to work, visiting each one of them with you. It'll give you a chance to see firsthand what I tried to tell you back in 1988, the vandalism that has gone on, and the extreme desecration of the cemeteries within this village. And if you stop and think, it's probably the only place left in this country are these old family cemeteries, old colonial cemeteries, where a tombstone, which someone carved and put an angel on and signed, a work of art, is left exposed for anyone to come see, anyone to take home, anyone to vandalize. Please come with me on the 28th of April. I personally will be in the Disbrow Cemetery. I invite you to come up those steps and visit with me while I give you a short lecture about the Disbrow clan. Other members of us will be in other cemeteries. We will end our program in the Richbell Cemetery, where we hope to rededicate the cemetery and rededicate what the Historical Society tried to do for that cemetery in cleaning it up so many years ago. Thank you, and good night.